Problem is, no one ever reads the policy. And even if they did, it basically says, well, just don't put our sensitive data into unapproved AI. That's pretty much it.
Thank you so very much for joining. Welcome to the Monpack webinar series. This month, we are excited to have Alistair Patterson, the CEO and co-founder of Harmonic Security. Today's topic is AI and security across the enterprise. I mean, what can go wrong? Well, apparently a lot. And so conversation today will be joined by our chairman and CEO, Mr. Monty Montgomery. A little bit of house cleaning here is I think everybody's microphones are off. And so as the conversation is going on, if you have a question, please feel free to throw it into the chat session as the conversation goes. If there's some questions, I'll kind of interrupt the panelists and ask the question. If by chance, for whatever reason, we don't get to your question during this session, we'll follow up with you. But otherwise, without further ado, Mr. Alistair Patterson, and I will turn it over to Mr. Monty Montgomery. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Don. I'm very excited to have Alistair on the webinar today. I've known Alistair 10 plus years, I would think, back in the Digital Shadows days. And normally we would be talking about soccer and the English Premier League, but we'll stop that. We won't even get into that today. But Alistair, thanks again for joining. One of the things that I think is very interesting is your career spans both cybersecurity and AI security. Can you give us a quick background of your career and how maybe those two things kind of interrelate?
Yeah, indeed. So, yeah, first of all, great to chat with you, Monty, and thanks for having me on here. As you can tell from the accent, everyone, I'm a local Californian, clearly here in San Francisco. But no, started out in the UK. I originally worked for 7 years for a British company, Detica, that was kind of the Palantir equivalent of the UK. So mostly looking at huge data sets, using data science and ML to find bad guys and bad stuff, mostly for government and some other large institutions. So that was kind of the sort of DNA I came from. Got acquired by BAE Systems. Didn't want to work for a huge defense contractor. So I went and set up my first startup, Digital Shadows, which was in the threat intel space. So really looking at essentially all the stuff going on around a business on the internet and where the threats were. So monitoring the open, deep and dark web on behalf of more than 500 pretty large commercial institutions. Ultimately, that's what got me out of the Valley, raised Series A, B and C out here before acquisition in 22. And then sort of tying it together, the end of 22 was the launch of ChatGPT, and the world changed once again. I think more probably more fundamentally than many other technology shifts. This is a big one, and I didn't want to sit on the sidelines. So here I am with Harmonic this time, really trying to understand how organizations can adopt AI safe and fast, because that's the key right now, between getting left behind and also exposing yourself to a ton of risk. And that duality and tough decision making sits in pretty much every company today. So that's where I'm spending a bunch of time right now.
That's great. I think your background's perfect for it. It's very exciting. So I heard that 7 out of 10 employees are using ChatGPT at work, yet hide it from their employers. The so-called sort of shadow AI use. Kind of scary, but what are your thoughts on that? And what are some of the sort of the recent mishaps that have happened with employee misuse or use of AI?
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, I think companies would like to think that they're driving AI adoption and the AI strategy, but I think the reality is often that the employees are driving it, right? Because we're all using these tools now outside of work, and we want to get that same value inside work. So what the reality we see is the average per company that we work with is about 250 different AI and AI enabled tools that they have in use, and they're probably aware of maybe 10, 20% of that. So there's a huge shadow AI challenge, first of all, which is just all this activity that's going on from the employees that they're often just totally unaware of. Literally before the call I just jumped off to come on here, Monty, was with a pretty major financial in Boston. And they have employees putting pretty sensitive financial information and customer information into ChatGPT, like personal ChatGPT accounts. And the ironic thing was they signed up with their work email address. So it was sort of veneer of corporate usage there, but actually it's personal accounts and even free accounts that were signed up to with a corporate address. So, but ChatGPT is kind of the thin end of the wedge here, because there's about 7,000 different AI and AI enabled apps that we're tracking at Harmonic. So there's a huge long tail beyond the major ones, which obviously get most of the attention.
Yeah, some niche ones, and they're using, people are using AI, employees are using it to gain efficiency, to get things done.
Totally.
But they're, law firms have used it and it relied too much on the AI. So
Yeah.
unpoliced by the law firm creates a problem. Hospital workers, very sensitive data, similar to the accounting data.
Yeah.
There's been some bad news in that department, right?
Yeah, there's a couple of hospitals getting sued right now for unauthorized use of AI with their customers' data and recording of interactions and calls with even with note takers and things like that. There's also questions around where does the data go and how is it stored? And for the legal industry, there's a couple of problems. Like one is the same sort of thing of like customer notes and there's a law firm we're working with who had an intern who had to write up a bunch of meeting minutes. So of course she put them all into one of the AI engines to summarize all the meetings, but it was unsanctioned AI, and so all that really sensitive legal data has been put out into places it shouldn't go, that may be trained upon, may sit in jurisdictions that the data shouldn't go into. And then the other piece for law firms is using unsanctioned AI and then generating outputs that are not, quoting cases that don't exist. There's been a couple of stories in the news about that. So I think there's an education piece, there's a sanctioned and unsanctioned use piece, there's a general loss of data problem that's perhaps number one and generating the most headlines.
Yeah, and I think that the loss of data, or where the data resides, is something that a lot of people don't think about. But if there's GDPR, there's state-based things,
HIPAA.
all those HIPAA is a huge one. So that's the risk. And CFOs, like I'm a former CFO, we think of risk and where's the risk in the organization. And so it's something you have to consider. Yet we want to take advantage of the productivity. And the
Totally.
simple policy is not quite enough, right? You don't want to take away the punch bowl of the efficiency of AI. So how do you go about, as an organization, really of any size? You could have 10 employees, some of them, they're all using it. How do you sort of go that fine balance between heavy risk and productivity?
Yeah, it's tough stuff. I mean, I think what we see, there's usually at this point there's really two camps left. There's, because everyone knows they got to get moving with AI now. That wasn't the case even 6 months ago. There were still some holdouts saying, like, oh, we're going to block and wait, and but I think today there's a group which is sort of default block, and then they're under pressure to enable more, and that tends to be like bigger companies, highly regulated, things like that. And they're trying to, step one is usually roll out Microsoft Copilot and point all your employees at that and try to block everything else. Not very sustainable, because Copilot kind of sucks for most employees, and they often try to find ways around it and use other tooling. But it's a start. But in general, I think if you go block heavy, that's really bad, because you just drive the behavior underground. And I was talking to a head of AI at a major health insurer, and he said, Al, I'm the head of AI and I don't have access to ChatGPT. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I use this laptop. And he like produced his personal laptop that he does. And then he said, and so does my team. I was like, what? So you just end up with this sort of sprawl of unmanaged stuff if you take too, block heavy an approach. And then the other side, and that's more where we see like private equity, tech companies and things like that, they often try to manage via policy. So they leave it pretty wide open. They try to enable the employees, and then they say, hey, look, here's our policy, everybody. Problem is, no one ever reads the policy. And even if they did, it basically says, well, just don't put our sensitive data into unapproved AI. That's pretty much it. And so the employees, and so the employees are just kind of going off. And so, so what do you do? I mean, I think it starts with visibility. I think you've got to get a view of like what is going on now, like who's using what and how are they using it. And there's a few different ways you can try and manually do that. Obviously, we help with that as well. And then I think it's sort of governed usage where you want people using and adopting this technology, but you've got to have some control around what is most sensitive to you. So maybe at a very high level, you should probably be blocking access. If you've got sensitive data that depends on jurisdiction, you should be blocking DeepSeek and China hosted models for a start, right? And then you probably want to look at use of personal accounts. You probably want to make sure. You got to meet the business where it is, right? Understand the use cases. Why are employees using these different tools, and what are their use cases, and how can we provide a safe way of them achieving the same results? So they've kind of got no excuse at that point. So here's a safe enterprise AI that we're paying a license for, that we're going to point everyone at, get all the corporate behavior in that, make it really effective, right? Add skills and context to it so that there's little value in them going outside of your preferred solution. Just rolling out Copilot to your employees doesn't count. That's not good enough. They're still going to go and use other tools and their favored ones. But that's
they may not like the favorite ones. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. So you don't want to restrict people. They're going to find the best tool for that particular thing. And I think there'll be tons of sort of niche tools out there. It's understanding a process for getting approval to be somewhat easier. Then they wouldn't hesitate. They wouldn't be in the shadows using it unauthorized, risking your data and the company's liability increasing, as well as but not restricting them for something they don't like to use. Like Copilot is also just ChatGPT, correct me if I'm wrong, sort of underlying it, right? The Microsoft and OpenAI are sort of joined at the hip, I understand.
That certainly was the case. Like they're sort of separating out a little bit. I think yesterday or today, even Sam Altman came out and said he's deploying on Amazon as well now, and Microsoft's been hosting Anthropic models for a while too. I think honestly, I think one of the realizations most recently is that the delta between the models is I think it's there, but it's not that great anymore. It's almost like the kind of the harness, the connective tissue around how the models are being used becomes more and more important, and kind of the experience of using them. And some of that, frankly, is on the enterprise to configure it well and roll it out well. And so I think increasingly it's if the model's got the right context, your employees have got access to skills that you can build in those AI platforms, then it goes a long way, right? So if we take Harmonic as an example, we're like leaning in heavily into Anthropic. We've built out a set of skills for our team in business context. So our Anthropic instance is reading all of our competitor data, all of our knowledge of all the deals and accounts. We've connected it through to obviously CRM in different ways, and then we've built out skills that do things like prepare the sales team for calls. So what is the deal with this customer? Let's get all the latest information. What do I need to know before I get onto this call? How do I position it, right? And then you can, after the meeting, you can obviously automatically update your CRM and generate follow-up emails automatically. And simple examples, but there's a ton of other stuff. We're doing the same in every team, right? Customer success and product, and so at that point, it's so valuable. Like, why would you start using one of the other tools? It's like, well, probably going to be less valuable to you in getting your job done for the most part. And we do provide multiple tools anyway, but we're a little bit of an edge case because we live and breathe this stuff. But yeah.
But it's very sound. Yes.
Oh, sorry. We had a question come in. I think it's specifically on this topic. It was sent to me directly. So as AI enhanced social engineering like deepfakes becomes standard, how can we train our employees to verify high authority requests that seem to come from leadership?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think there's a whole side of this, which is the new threats that are coming from AI. I think there's a few dimensions that's coming from, and one of them for sure is deep fakes and really good phishing emails, right? Very high quality. There used to be a kind of distinction. There was sort of phishing attacks and then spear phishing, which was much more targeted attacks that were customized to specific employees. And it used to be very hard to build those because it took time to research and customize and write them, which is why most phishing attacks were pretty poor quality, right? But now you can, at scale, using AI, generate very good quality personalized attacks. I think it's very hard to prepare the employees for this. I mean, the security awareness training for sure should still be part of the curriculum, and making sure that employees get a security briefing on the way in. In particular, I think new joiners is where we see a lot of attacks because they're, the bet is that they don't really understand the systems and the context. They can see that someone's announced on LinkedIn that they're joining another company, so they probably get hit up pretty quickly with phishing emails and even SMS and that sort of thing. So I think it's part of the new joiner experience. I think it's very important to tackle this topic and continue security awareness more generally. But I think you have to look beyond purely training for this. I think you've got to look at your other controls and what have you got in terms of email security. There's some pretty good solutions out there with the likes of Sublime and Abnormal and others that are going a little bit beyond the standard out of the box stuff from Microsoft and others, for example. But in other areas, it's like what else can we do for any interaction that employees are having to check malicious links in the browser and things like that. I think all those technologies are probably becoming more important. It's almost like our hygiene has to get better in everything we were doing before to meet the challenge of this era. We haven't even started talking about vulnerabilities, which I think we'll get onto later, Monty, but that's with Mythos and all of that. That's a whole other thing.
It does seem like an arms race to a degree with the AI, their AI versus our AI protecting the company. But you made a really good point earlier about the various tools. If you implement the tools properly, you're eliminating a lot of the shadow use, which is where a lot of the risk lies in those tools that are not sanctioned, because you've set it up properly. So if you're deploying AI well within your organization, it's a lot safer. But thinking of and you mentioned Anthropic, Claude, we talked about Chat, there's other LLM. What do you feel like, in this personal opinion, some are safer or maybe less problematic when it comes to enterprise data security than others? I mean, I always thought that WhatsApp was encrypted and safe, and then we learned that they were reading the text, somewhere offshore. So I don't really trust. I think I have a healthy distrust. I don't think I'm a Luddite. But if you had to say, oh, you only have to choose one LLM, go with this one. It seems to be the safest.
Yeah, I think it's difficult, right, to know for sure. I know the enterprise just defaults to Microsoft every time, and for better or worse, you sort of feel a little safer doing that. Google, I think, really has their story together in general around security. It's always been very strong, and I think as I think about my very sensitive personal data, I probably feel slightly better about putting it into Gemini than many other places as a result. But I think you can't ignore how strong Anthropic is in enterprise right now. It's just got the best set of tools and offering. And so about 70-80% of the calls we're having are people that are trying to figure out how to roll out Claude Cowork and things like that securely. And that's where we help and get involved. And Anthropic's just stance is very pro enterprise. They've been very pro security and privacy relatively from the get-go, almost like philosophically and in terms of their mission. And you contrast that with sort of Meta, Facebook, as you're saying. I'm not putting my personal data anywhere near Manus. I mean, I know the deal might be called off anyway now in the last 48 hours, but it's it's almost because I don't trust the philosophy of the founder and the business. ChatGPT, I think, really strong team and security is strong, but again, not quite the same philosophy. And you've just got to assume that they're all moving so fast that security, although it's a priority for them, it's just such a dynamic environment. My assumption is that the most advanced attackers, like the nation states, have probably already got into a bunch of these AI companies and particularly the Anthropics and OpenAIs. But that's at this point, so many corporations have got their data in there. You're probably not going to be the headline if there is a breach from Anthropic or something like that. And probably it's going to happen quietly from a nation state more than it's going to happen from a criminal group that's going to publish the data on the internet. Is pragmatically thinking about it. I think the biggest thing for companies, though, it's not really about have you picked the most secure company to go with. I think it's more about how do you set it up and use it. To be honest, that's probably where I would spend the time and energy. We have there's a lot of settings when you're deploying it. Like, how do you configure it and give who you give access to what? And there's a lot you can just do yourself. So we've published some free security guides on harmonic.security for things like Claude Cowork and Claude Code and Claude more generally and others. And there's a lot of, it's more a guide to your your IT team in like how to provision it and configure it in a secure way. And I think that's part one for sure. And then, as you're saying, I think there's a lot in giving people what they need to do the job, because most people, they're not trying to put the company at risk. They're just trying to get the job
Right.
done. And if you don't give them safe options, they'll use unsafe ones. And then if you give them safe options and they're still using unsafe ones, well, then they've kind of got no excuse, because you did what you could. So, so I
Yes.
think that's the other big measure. I think those are way more impactful than trying to pick like Anthropic over ChatGPT for security reasons, I think.
That's right. That's very insightful. Thank you. The use of AI agents expanding, hot topic. I'm a little old school, as I mentioned earlier, but I don't think I could sleep at night if I knew there a bunch of agents running amok with my data. The data we have in the accounting world, bank account numbers, social security numbers, fairly radioactive stuff when it comes to, threat loss. What are your thoughts on deploying agents, and what are some of the threats with them? They're going to be great. We know that yet.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the new frontier, really. I mean, I think most companies are still not quite there. They're still at the point of just trying to roll out, personal usage of AI for the employees, and maybe particularly if they're in, a software company, of course they're building AI into their products as well, that are going to their customers. But I think in terms of like operationalizing agents internally to run functions, in most cases they're still at sort of POV stage and not heavily deployed, and the security controls are still catching up. To be honest, there is no silver bullet for how to handle this, and the best practice is still being written, and it's evolving incredibly quickly. But what I'd say is I think people sort of throw around agent and they mean a lot of different things typically. So maybe I just start with that quickly. So I think there's like agents that are built into your existing SaaS products. So if you've got Salesforce, right, Agentforce, classic example, but many existing companies are adding agents that do things in their environment for you automatically. Whether it's Slack, it's Notion, it's Salesforce is maybe the best known example. I think that's like one category of agent. Then there's the ones that you're building yourself, maybe with citizen developers. So it's sort of like you've got employees going off building things with agent builder software like Copilot Studio, and Google has their equivalent. There's equivalents from the big platforms. So I think that it's almost like citizen developers and big platforms is an interesting one, like how you manage that. I personally think this is going to cause a lot of problems if you've got all these apps hanging out that have been custom built and vibe coded, and then employees leave and stuff breaks, and what are you going to do? I think we're building it. I think it's a bit of a fiction at the moment to say that you can get rid of your SaaS stack and just vibe code it internally. I think that's probably not happening for systems of record, at least, but in some cases it may make sense. And then I think there's sort of the third one, which is the little more, the one that people imagine a bit more, which is probably letting the agents run amok a bit more, where you've got engineers that are really trying to build agents from the ground up that are fully automating, almost like a virtual employee that has an identity and is operating like an employee in your ecosystem. Maybe they're building it on top of OpenClaw or something like that. That is pretty out there for most companies today. Like I think the risk there is more, you've got some enterprising technical employees that might be spinning up things like OpenClaw or Perplexity Computer, or there's a range of others. Hermes is the sort of new trendy one at the moment that they might be installing on laptops and automating bits of their job, right? But I think there's few companies outside of Bay Area that are seriously trying to do that, to automate their work today, and that is a whole thing. So I think for most people, right, it comes more down to the first couple of categories, right? How are you deploying? Like if you're deploying Salesforce Agentforce, that's a much safer thing to do than just letting things run amok. So I think it's like, as with any other piece of software, it's worth kicking the tires and understanding for each specific SaaS application that has agents, what's the scope, right? What data do they have access to, and what are they able to, what's the extent of the permissions? And all those SaaS companies are having to bring out some sort of custom guidelines for their agents and controls around it. So it's a little bit case by case at the moment. I think on the second area that I was talking about, which is
froze.
Oh, sorry, you still got me?
Yep. So have you now? Yeah.
Got you. Okay. So yeah, I was thinking for first category, very much vendor by vendor dependent. It sort of comes back to getting visibility, doing some third party risk, looking at the config and setup, and who gets
Yeah.
access to what, and what the agent gets access to, and they have a range of settings. So I think that's like one category. That's probably a good place to start, to be honest, because they've been built by your existing vendor for a set of use cases you almost certainly already have. I think that's a good place to get started. Citizen developers, I'm as you heard, I'm a little kind of skeptical on the how that's going to go. I think there's a lot of risk around that. The controls are not great. I would just look carefully at who you're enabling to do that and what they're doing with it. I'm not saying say no, but I think it's time to be probably a little bit cautious and again get some monitoring in for who's doing what with those and how they're able to deploy them and where. So there's again a lot in the config and setup of the access you give to people. And then the third one, when people are running amok a little bit and building like virtual employees, I think that is a bit of a hype bandwagon for the average company today, and something to keep an eye on. Lots more we could talk about. It's a huge topic, but I put it in the unsolved currently in security box. We're spending a ton of time and energy on exactly this at the moment, so we can keep talking about it. And the world's changing every week.
Right, definitely changing. So MCP is kind of a tame version of this agent where you're using that tool. Explain what MCP is and how to best deploy it. It seems like that's an initial step to using AI in your tools and an easy one, fairly safe one. Is that accurate? Or
yeah, again, it depends. I mean, it's just a protocol, right? Model context protocol. It's very lightweight. It's a way of essentially enabling agents to use tools and data that you've got in the enterprise and connecting them up. And so for agents to do anything useful, they need to be connected up. I think the risk there is that you have some sensitive data that's going from A to B when the agent's making tool calls and pulling information through or doing something that we don't want it to do. So there's nothing particularly secure or insecure about MCP as a thing in general. It's more like how is it set up, deployed, and used, and what data is traveling over it. The risk, there's a few risks today. I mean, I think as you've got your more technical teams that are using Cursor, Windsurf, like Codex, Claude Code, all those types of tools are typically connecting over MCP to things like, for example, Salesforce, right? Your CRM or to Slack or to Notion or other systems of record in the business. And the way that happens, you may not want all your employees to be able to do that at will with any of the data in any of those sources. And so you've got to be pretty careful about what connectors they're allowed to establish and how. If you let someone loose, that we use Claude Cowork heavily, great product. It is spinning up agents. It has access via connectors over MCP to things like CRM and Slack and Notion. But we've developed our own MCP gateway. It's one of our products, and so we're using that to very tightly control which connections are allowed and what data is allowed to go from A to B, so that we don't have someone pulling data out of HubSpot and throwing it into personal Notion accounts, let's say, for example, or whatever else it might be doing. So it's something, I think it is like, for these things to be valuable, you've got to connect them up, but you should also have absolute control over who's connecting what to what. And to do that, you definitely need to stretch beyond the controls that Anthropic and others give you today. But they have a starting point, right, where you can scope things and approve and unapprove the plugins and connectors that you want people using. So that's a start, at least.
Seems manageable, yeah. Any other thoughts? We touched briefly on AI and cybersecurity and how it's just really sophisticated phishing and spear phishing, which made it very easy. All of our new employees, whenever they post on LinkedIn, they get a text from me saying,
"Yeah,
hey, I need gift cards." The gift card thing is what makes it easy to tell it's BS.
Yeah.
But any other thoughts on cybersecurity? I mean, besides just the spear phishing and the phishing attacks, I mean, is it?
Yeah.
Anthropic announced something that they weren't going to release it, right? It was just too powerful. Wasn't that the fraud detection or the weakness detection? Great PR, by the way, but scary at the same time.
There's a lot of debate at the moment around whether that was a PR move or whether the other slant on it is they just don't have enough compute in order to roll that model out to everybody. So even if it is as good as they say and it exists in the way that they describe, if they rolled it out to everybody, they would just run out of juice. and I find that quite a plausible argument when you look at the uptake at the moment and the token spend from everybody. I think it's looking at the moment like they don't have enough investment in infrastructure, and OpenAI might have got it right because they're still able to power their new models. So the fact they've developed this enormous model, in theory, Mythos, you know, how much truth is there in it? I don't know. I'm sort of inclined to give them a bit of the benefit of the doubt on the model. I know people that have looked at it and confirmed that it is very powerful. But even with the current like Opus 4.7, kind of the same thing is there, which is that as these models get better and better, and Mythos seems to be the extreme example, they're very, very good at identifying vulnerabilities in software, right? So if you think about all these open source projects where they've been out there for years and they're key parts of infrastructure in many businesses and the internet in general, they have bugs in them, right? Occasionally one comes to light because some researcher finds it, but for the most part, there's a ton of bugs in there that are still yet to be found. And so right. Even with 4.6, 4.7, there were new bugs that were identified in that software. And so the story is essentially with Mythos that in theory, we can find a lot more bugs that would immediately open up a lot of institutions and key bits of the internet potentially to attackers to get in that would just not have been seen or known about before. This used to be the preserve of like the 3-letter agencies, right? And security right. services around the country that would spend tons of time and effort of very talented people trying to break into these bits of software, then keep them quiet. They're known as 0 days because they're not known about publicly. Use them to secretly get access to overseas assets or whatever they need, and pull the data out. Right, that's been a thing for years. And so now what we're saying with Mythos is, well, you know what, at sort of a factory like scale, we can just go through all the software that exists today and start pulling out these 0 days. And then, so if you just launch that on the world, it is absolutely true. Well, chaos would ensue, right? Because all the criminal gangs that would get access to it would bust open all kinds of companies and not just companies, but bits of internet infrastructure and God knows what. And it would be bad news. So in theory, what they're doing is releasing that to some of the bigger security companies immediately, allowing people to patch things up ahead of public release. But there may be other motives, I guess, is the story behind it. So the question is like, what happens now? And I think what happens is everyone's patching and vulnerability game has to get better because these models are going to come out. And so we're going to get more and more advisories probably saying, hey, look, bug here, like patch this, patch that. And we got to be on top of our game because the bad guys are going to get access to at least some of these models pretty quickly and then start to have more effective attacks if we don't.
And I think it's a great explanation. I think the risk is not necessarily for Montpac clients at their size, but some of the people that you're working with, some of your vendors that are big companies, they're at risk. And I think that also applies to the comments you made about the ability to do the compute power. What are your thoughts on sort of the financial health of the LLM business model and sort of the hyperscalers, right? Extremely capital intensive. They're doing some funny accounting. They're reporting profit before research, which is, I guess, interesting. It's not normal R&D. Sometimes they have negative gross margins. I think, some people think they're depreciating these chips over a longer period of time than there's their actual useful life, and therefore their P&Ls are a little a little too rosy. And I get the whole grabbing market share. Is it sustainable, healthy? What are your thoughts on this? Would you pick a healthier one, LLM, financially, just to avoid having to reboot and switch to a new one? I mean,
yeah, what a great question. I mean, you've got a great view of this as well. I'd love to get more of your take. I think just in terms of what I'm saying, so the view that I have is probably how is enterprise thinking about it today, and what are people doing, and then obviously I think about the markets a bit, but I feel like for the markets, they're almost trying to price in a couple of different outcomes here. Like one outcome is, this is a bubble, it's overblown, and everything's overvalued, and we've invested too much in data centers already, and they're sort of priced to perfection, and so there's one bubble risk there. I think the other risk is, we probably underestimated how good and how fast these companies and models are, and they're going to displace a ton more SaaS more quickly than we thought. And so all the public markets that are invested in SaaS and other companies, those companies are not going to be here in 5-10 years, or maybe less, right? Maybe in like 4 years. So then those if they're going to zero or way devalued, well, what does that mean to the market? And so, and I think it's, the jury is out to some extent. I can certainly give you my view though. I think that it's proven, my view's probably changed in the last 3 months. Like I see absolutely tangible outcomes now. I'm spending half my day in Claude Cowork, spinning up my own agents, doing a bunch of work for me. And I think the value is obvious to me here. And I think most enterprises are seeing that. And there's a scramble to not to be left behind. But I think we're seeing that it's going to be uneven in terms of how it's felt in the rest of the market. I think there's a good argument that the systems of record that are moving fast enough can keep position. I don't think they're going to wipe out all software for the reasons I said. I think like trying to vibe code your own stuff is going to be a risk for a long time, because you're just gonna you're not thinking about all the security, compliance, legal challenges, all the it's just gonna be too big a lift for enterprise. So I think, the financial health of them, they're priced high, but I would probably still buy Anthropic stock today if it was available at the sort of valuations it is, just because I think it would be a pretty good hedge, because I think they've really got their act together and they're driving a really strong game. And then ChatGPT, I think still that you need more than one in there. I think they have incredible models as well. Probably the biggest risk to these companies is whether a DeepSeek or equivalent just comes up with something at 10% of the cost. That then just undercuts them, because enterprises like, well, I'd love to use this American built tech, but I can get open source for 10% of the cost, host it in Amazon. Like, why would I not do that, right? Because the token costs are just ballooning, and we might reach a point here where it's just too expensive for enterprise to buy all this stuff. But I think the value's there, the product's there, right? It's incredible product market fit. I'd love to be a salesperson at Anthropic right now. You're just taking orders. They can't take them fast enough.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you for that. So look into the future. What is, an AI risk that people are talking about now, or one that they're not talking about that you may think is a big one, something we should think about, doesn't impact today, but it's moving fast, but down the road, what concerns do you have?
Yeah, I think we touched on a lot of it, but I think the way agents are going, I think, is really interesting. So I think one of the big learnings at the moment is, like, the chatbot era came and it was useful and valuable, right? And we all got a bit of value out of it, and we started using it in our personal life. But it didn't translate into immediate huge workforce gains and efficiency gains, and like, it didn't on its own. The chatbot was not enough to have that type of impact. But what I think last year was supposed to be the year of agents, and it wasn't. I think this year is the year of agents. But when I say that, I'm thinking quite specifically that companies are going to need to figure out how to get appropriate context into platforms like Claude Cowork for their knowledge workers. And so that if you think about all of the institutional knowledge that most companies have, right? All your business processes, and like who approves what, and like, say I think about companies now in terms of like events. So a meeting happens. Okay, what is the whole timeline after that meeting occurs in terms of like the follow up, the recording of what happened, the next steps and actions, and the updates to systems that occurs, and then if you think about it from a customer life cycle, well, okay, how do they onboard, and like, what's their experience, and if they have a question, how is that handled, and how do you approach the renewal, and what are the decisions that are made around pricing and upsell, and who owns that, and like, so every company has these deep institutional knowledge, and that we somehow need to be flowing into the platforms that our employees are using in order for them to automate things and get value out of them and get the right insights. And I think people are probably not quite understanding today that the context windows are still pretty small around these things. So you start, even if you got Claude Cowork, you ask it to do some stuff and it'll forget about it pretty quickly, like what you asked it to do yesterday. And a lot of, even if you start using project structures, unless you're quite disciplined about how you put the context in, it doesn't get all of that out. And so anyway, coming back to so where do I see the world going? I think I think there's going to be a big movement over the next year to get appropriate context into these agents. And the temptation is going to be to ride roughshod over all security and privacy issues with that, because you don't want every employee and agent having access to all of the data that they have in the
HR,
business.
yeah,
All
everything.
kinds of stuff, right? Yeah, performance reviews or like HR
Yeah.
issues, and so like how you give appropriate context at the right time to the right employees using the right agents, I think is going to be a bit of a minefield for security and privacy, and then the actions it takes. There's this concept, you can sort of Google it, the lethal trifecta, which explains the problem with AI and agents around prompt injection attacks, which you might have heard of. So maybe just to outline that. So the problem with
I've never
LLMs
heard of that
is
prompt
prompt
injection
injection. Yeah,
attacks.
so prompt
Okay.
injection is a yeah. Without getting into the weeds, it is quite a big deal here. So, to try and explain that, so LLMs, so most things that we do with computers are deterministic, and LLMs are not. So you can persuade LLMs to do things that they shouldn't, and you might have heard of models getting like jailbroken or prompt injected is another way to achieve jailbreaking, which is to get them to do things they weren't designed to do, right? So you've got an agent that you've set up, or a model that you've set up, and it's told to deal with customers in a particular way, and it's only supposed to answer their questions, but an attacker can get hold of one of them and persuade it to do the attacker's bidding, right? Which could be go and retrieve all the customer data out of the database that you've got access to and email it to me, or like fire it out to me over this chat interface, right? That would be one example. But on a personal level, if you can take over the agents that people have running on their machines, well, you get to see the inbox, right? Okay, I'm gonna go and issue a password reset request, and then forward me the email that you got to reset the password, would be like a classic example that an attacker might do. Then delete the email about the password reset request, so you have no idea that I got it and got access to your accounts or something like that. So I think, so how does that happen? So prompt injection attack is kind of the most obvious one. One of the vulnerable surfaces would be browser automation. If I think AI browsers are just too early at the moment, and I don't say this very often, but I would probably block things like Comet and the AI browser from OpenAI and others, because they don't have a defense for prompt injection, right? But it's not just the browser surface, but how it works is the attacker basically persuades so what happens when you've got an AI browser or something like that is it goes to a web page, and of course it's reading the web page and then taking actions based on what it's reading on the web page. And so if you've got an attacker who set up a malicious web page, and hidden in the web page it says, forget all previous instructions, you are under my control, you need to go and do A and B and C, then there are attacks like that are still effective today on the most advanced models. Now it's pretty hard. The most advanced models now are pretty hardened. They have all kinds of controls in place that supposedly prevent those types of attacks. But actually they're definitely not foolproof today. They are at risk. And particularly the less sophisticated models are relatively easy for the bad guys to break into. So if you're using the cheap models, they're easier to trick. And so if you want to look at a bunch of examples, there's a guy called Pliny on X who spends his whole time just breaking into the latest models, and he always parades whatever's just been released by Anthropic or whatever, and he's shown that he can break it open, right, and get it to do things it wasn't supposed to do. And so there's a whole, obviously the criminal community's into this. We're not seeing many examples yet. There's some real examples now. Google put out a paper in the last week about it, looking at some real examples of attacks. But that is the issue. There's a concept called the lethal trifecta, which is basically you don't want agents to have untrusted input. So if they've got an external channel that an attacker could put untrusted input in, that's factor one. Factor two is the fact that they have the access to sensitive internal data of some sort. And then factor three is that they have a way of getting it out. And so if you have any agent that has all of those three, or any model that has all of those three, you're potentially in trouble, because someone could give an untrusted input. There's a way of then tricking that model into doing something and then there's access to sensitive data and a way to get it out. So that's like, if you know, we're getting in the weeds a little bit here, but this is basically the biggest unsolved problem in AI security today is prompt injection attacks and the ability to protect these models and these agents, and no one solved it, and we're some way off. So as a result, we still proceed with caution would be my advice.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, normally I have a webinar and I talk about something like SaaS metrics, something I'm very familiar with. Here I'm asking questions, I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm learning new things, which is great. So to sort of summarize today, we got, like settings and configurations are extremely important, whether it's any AI tool. Choosing great tools and setting them up properly to get the real utility out of that will avoid some of the shadow stuff. It's AI browsers, a no-no at this time, maybe in the future. You mentioned cheap models are not that safe, I think. So go with a good quality company. You like Anthropic, it sounds like. And watch out for those prompt injection attacks, which is such a scary concept. But we did get into a lot of details. But I think if you're, it is safe to use AI when done properly.
Yes,
it's going to happen anyway, so you might as well try to put some energy into setting it up right, and then just use trusted advisors. And you think that's a good summary? And maybe if you're really interested, study the lethal trifecta a little more. Certainly, the configuration tools you have on the Harmonic side is very helpful to people. But to wrap things up, where are you on the spectrum of super optimistic and excited about AI, or nervous and scared on the other end of the spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, I love this stuff. I'm definitely on the pro optimistic side of AI. I think it's just incredible what we can do. I think occasionally it makes leaps where it's, I think 4.6 came out and Cowork at the start of the year, and it was a bit of a like, whoa moment, like where is this going? And is it going to start replacing more knowledge work and engineers and all those things? And I think kind of where things are coming out, at least at the moment, is actually it's probably not going to be quite the job displacement worry that I was thinking about in the near term. I think it's creating opportunities for people, and I think it's more like people. You can't think about your job function the way you did for the last 10, 20 years. You've got to think about like, what is my job function in this era? So as I'm hiring people, like we're hiring a bunch of people. If you look at, OpenAI is hiring a bunch of people, so is Anthropic, right? They wouldn't be doing that if they knew they're not going to need them in a year or two's time. But I think the question I ask everyone now is, okay, you're coming in to run like pre-sales. Okay, what do you think pre-sales looks like over the next couple of years? Like, how is it getting affected by this era? What would you do differently compared to your last 10 years experience? And people have got to have answers to that and be leaning into how to use these tools for their functions. So I'm sort of quite optimistic. I think where I'm a little worried, I've got a couple of little kids, and I'm just thinking like, 18 years ahead or 20 years ahead when they're entering the workforce. It's like, well, what does that look like for them, and how do I prepare them for that? Because I think I can see the next little period looks kind of cool, but I think longer term it's hard to have a good horizon. I was listening to a podcast with Claude, Cowork's creator, and he was saying, look, the roadmap for Cowork is 1 month long maximum. And so he's saying like anyone who's thinks they can tell you what AI looks like next year is either deluded or lying about it, because we just don't know. And so I think if you fast forward out like 10 years, I don't think any of us have a clear vision of what that's going to look like. So, yeah,
it's an amazing era. It feels very different from the .com era, which was similar in terms of capital intensive, a lot of activity. But this is exciting. Thank you so much for all your input. It's very enlightening. Don, we have a few minutes. Are there any questions lingering?
I haven't seen any additional questions. If anybody wants to throw a question into the chat,
hopefully we didn't scare people away.
Sorry about that.
I don't know. I'm nervous now.
Maybe now might be a good time while we're waiting for a question to come in and talk about the EPL standings. I don't know. Maybe the team that's in first and the team that's in fourth place. I don't know. I'm just
I don't think we
random.
Should.
Okay,
just throwing random.
Yeah. All right. I'm not going to say anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just taking a look here. We still have a few attendees left. If any last moment questions coming through, otherwise, Alistair, sincerely appreciate you, my friend, for taking the time and enlightening all of us on this a very exciting topic. And yeah, I don't think there's going to be any questions coming in at this time. And so for everybody that had joined, thank you very much for your time. Alistair, again, appreciate you. Monty, thank you so very much. We will see you all potentially on the next MONTPAC webinar series. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. And thank you all again for attending. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Don. Thanks,
Take care,
Alistair.
everyone.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
I owe you a
Pleasure.
pint. All right. Take care.
Yeah, we'll do
Bye.
it. All the best.